this video, we're going to discover the details of the Toledo Family Murders case. A true crime story filled with mystery, betrayal, and unanswered questions. Let's get started. The night was still in Deltona, Florida, as the wind rustled through the quiet streets. It was the autumn of 2013 when a mother and her two children simply disappeared. One moment, they were in their home, and the next, they were ghosts. No calls, no messages, just silence. Yesenia Suarez, a 28-year-old mother, had last spoken to someone around midnight. Her children, 9-year-old Talia Otto and 8-year-old Michael Elijah Otto, never arrived at school the next morning. Concern turned into panic, and soon the police were at her doorstep. Her husband, Toledo, was there too. His face was the picture of confusion, worry even. He swore he had no idea where they were, that he had woken up to an empty house. But something about him didn't sit right with the officers, and as they stepped inside, an uneasy feeling wrapped around them. Everything was too clean. The air was thick with the sharp tang of pine sol, bleach, and vinegar. A desperate attempt to scrub something away. The house was in perfect order, almost staged. And then there was the smell. An overwhelming stench that made the hair on the back of the officer's neck stand up. Two young sisters hesitated before revealing what they had heard. Screams from the Suarez Toledo home in the dead of night. Dismissing it as teenage noise, they now realized the horror they'd ignored. Investigators searched the house, uncovering chilling traces of blood despite attempts to clean it. The master bedroom, bathroom, and hallway all held tiny damning specks. Then came the discovery that sealed the case. 23 blood traces, all leading to one victim, 9-year-old Talia. Toledo was taken into custody. He didn't struggle, didn't resist, but the words that left his mouth were far from an admission of guilt. Instead, he spun a tale, one so implausible that it only deepened the mystery. He claimed Yesenia had left him, that she had packed up the kids and vanished into the night. Yet her car was missing, her purse, her phone, all gone. Still, something didn't add up. Why would a mother run without telling her own family? Why would she take nothing but leave behind signs of struggle? As officers continued their questioning, another neighbor, Tyshawn Jackson, hesitated before stepping forward. A college student who lived across the street. He had been dragged into something far beyond his comprehension. That morning, at around 6 a.m., Luis had knocked on his door. His request was simple, or so it seemed. "Follow me," he had said. "I need a ride back." Tyshawn had agreed, unaware that he was about to step into something far more sinister than a routine errand. Luis drove Yesenia's Honda Accord, leading him down south to Lake Mary, a town nearly 30 minutes away. There, in a supermarket parking lot, Tyshawn watched as Luis meticulously wiped down the car, scrubbing the handles, the doors, every inch. Something felt wrong, and a cold dread settled into Tyshawn's gut. When they returned to Deltona, Luis wasn't done. He pulled into an apartment complex and began tossing things away. A plastic bag filled with cleaner bottles, a dirty boot, a floor mat from the Honda. One glance at Tyshawn's face told him he knew too much. The drive back home was thick with silence, suffocating, unrelenting. By the time Tyshawn reached his doorstep, he was shaking. He grabbed his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed his mother, desperate for guidance. What had he just been a part of? What had he witnessed? Meanwhile, investigators traced his steps. They found the Honda Accord abandoned, just as Tyshawn had described. Inside, Yesenia's purse, her ID, her work badge. A single fingerprint, Luis's, lingered on the garage door opener. And in the dumpsters, the bag of discarded items revealed chilling evidence. A trunk liner, a barber's apron, a child's toy, and a boot with a tiny, unmistakable speck of blood. It was a crime scene spread across miles. A puzzle with pieces soaked in lies and deception. And then, the final piece fell into place. Under mounting evidence, Luis Toledo cracked, but his confession took a twist. He claimed Yesenia's death was accidental, a fight over video games gone wrong. One hit, and she was gone. But the children? He denied any involvement, blaming Tyshawn instead. According to Luis, the college student, afraid the kids had seen too much, made them disappear. Yet, with no bodies and no proof, Luis clung to the last shred of doubt he could weave into the case. Yet the blood in the house spoke louder than he ever could. The trails of bleach and vinegar, the meticulously cleaned car, the discarded evidence, each one whispered a darker truth. Yesenia, Talia, and Michael were gone. And in the shadows of Deltona, Florida, the hunt for their bodies was only just beginning. The courtroom sat in heavy silence as the prosecution laid out its final arguments. Every piece of evidence painted a damning picture of Luis Toledo, a man consumed by rage, spiraling into an irreversible abyss. But despite the mountain of proof, the one thing that remained missing was the most crucial: the bodies of Yesenia Suarez and her two children, Talia and Michael Otto. Without them, there was always a sliver of doubt, a slim chance for the defense to argue that maybe, just maybe, Luis hadn't committed the unthinkable. But the state had a plan. Assistant State Attorney Ann Wedge McMillan had been here before. She'd seen men like Toledo, men who knew how to manipulate the system. He was a former gang enforcer, a man accustomed to getting away with things others wouldn't. But she wasn't about to let him slip through the cracks. Luis Toledo knew exactly what he was doing that night. She told the jury, this wasn't a moment of passion. This was cold, calculated murder. A man doesn't clean a crime scene, destroy evidence, and dispose of bodies unless he knows he's guilty. Her voice was unwavering, her conviction clear. The jury hung on to every word. But then the defense had its turn. Luis Toledo's attorney, grasping at any thread that could cast doubt, turned the focus on Tyshawn Jackson. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution wants you to believe that my client, an intelligent man, a father, would harm his own family. The defense argued. But they refused to consider the possibility that the real killer is out there. That Tyshawn Jackson, who was in possession of key evidence, could have played a larger role than they're willing to admit. It was a desperate move, but not without impact. Because in a case like this, all it took was one juror with lingering doubt to turn the tide. Throughout the trial, Luis remained stone-faced. He sat in his chair, eyes fixed forward, refusing to give the courtroom the satisfaction of emotion. But then came the testimony of Sergeant Kurt Shoops. The officer recounted the chilling moment Toledo hinted at knowing where the bodies were. How he had pleaded for one final trip home. Not to confess, but to die where his family had died. Luis Toledo told me, I want to die where my family died. That was his way of admitting what he had done. A ripple of tension moved through the room. But the final blow came when the prosecution played recorded footage of Luis inside the interrogation room. His outbursts, his sudden breakdowns, his attempts to manipulate officers into letting him walk free, and then his failed suicide attempt. The jury watched as officers broke into the locked bathroom, finding Toledo bleeding from self-inflicted cuts, glass shards scattered across the floor. It was a man unraveling under the weight of his own guilt. The deliberations didn't take long. When the jury returned, the room sat frozen. Yesenia's family clutched hands, whispering silent prayers. Luis Toledo remained impassive. On the charge of first-degree murder for the deaths of Talia and Michael Otto. Guilty on the charge of second-degree murder for the death of Yesenia Suarez. Guilty. Not a single gasp, not a single word. Just silence, thick, suffocating silence. Toledo barely reacted, but in that moment, everyone in that room knew. The mask had finally cracked. With the verdict in, the only question left was whether Toledo would receive the death penalty. 2 of the 12 jurors hesitated. They saw no remorse in him, but they also feared sentencing him to death. Maybe it was because they knew Luis Toledo was already a dead man walking. In prison, there was no protection for men like him. A convicted child killer, a gang enforcer who had betrayed his own. And Luis knew it too. In his final statement, he looked at the judge and spoke with chilling certainty. If I touch any institution, I'm a dead man walking. The minute I hit that compound, it's over. He wanted death row. He wanted isolation, safety, but the court wouldn't give it to him. Instead, he was handed 3 life sentences. No parole, no second chances. As of today, Luis Toledo sits in a maximum security prison, living out the rest of his days among inmates who know exactly who he is. He still refuses to reveal where the bodies of Yesenia, Talia, and Michael are. The families are left without closure, without graves to visit, without answers, and maybe that was Toledo's final act of control, the only power he had left. If you found this case informative, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next one.